The scream tore through the pack house before dawn, and Elena Hartley was already awake when it happened, because she had not slept at all that night. She sat up in bed, heart hammering, and looked at the empty space beside her where Damien Cole should have been sleeping. He had not come to bed. Again, she pulled on a robe and walked into the hallway, and that was when she saw Lily Bennett standing outside Damien's study, her hands pressed to her face, sobbing so hard her shoulders shook. "What happened?" Elena asked, though something cold was already forming in her stomach. Lily looked up at her, eyes wet and wide, and for a moment, Elena thought she saw something flicker behind those tears, something calculating, something that vanished so fast, she convinced herself she had imagined it. "Nothing," Lily whispered. "It's nothing. I'm fine." But she was not fine, and by the time the sun rose over the Blackthorn territory, half the pack had gathered outside the main house, drawn by the sound of crying and the low murmur of gossip that spreads through a wolf pack faster than fire through dry grass. Elena stood on the porch in her robe, arms crossed, trying to piece together what had happened during the hours she had spent alone in bed, waiting for a husband who never came. Damien emerged from his study looking tired, his jaw tight, his eyes refusing to meet hers. Behind him, Lily wiped her face with the sleeve of her sweater, careful, Elena noticed, not to smear whatever makeup she still had on despite the early hour. "She says someone threatened her," Damien said, his voice flat, controlled, the voice he used when he wanted to sound like a leader instead of a man who owed his wife an explanation. "Last night, in this house." Elena felt the eyes of the pack turn toward her. She felt them before she saw them, the way you feel a change in weather before the clouds arrive. She was the Luna. If something happened inside these walls, if someone had been frightened or hurt, the pack would look to her, because for 6 years, she had been the one who kept this house standing, who kept these people safe, who never once had needed anyone to raise a hand against her to prove her strength. "I don't know anything about that," Elena said carefully. "I was in our room all night, alone." The last word hung in the air a little too long, and she watched something shift in Damien's expression, a flicker of guilt quickly buried under irritation. "Nobody is accusing you of anything, Elena," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Lily made a small sound, something between a hiccup and a sob, and immediately 3 pack members moved toward her, murmuring comfort, patting her shoulder, one of them shooting Elena a look that was almost accusatory, as if Elena's calm was itself a kind of confession. Elena felt her throat tighten. She had built this pack's trust, brick by brick, through long nights tending to the sick, through mediating disputes between families who had feuded for generations, through standing at Damien's side during the war with the Ashford pack 3 winters ago, when half the men doubted a woman could hold a territory together, while her mate fought on the front lines. She had done all of that, and now, because a woman she had known for 6 weeks was crying in a hallway, she could feel that trust cracking like ice under too much weight. "What exactly happened?" Elena asked again, keeping her voice level. "If someone frightened her, I want to know who, so we can deal with it properly." Lily's eyes darted toward Damien, just for a second, so quick that only someone who had spent years reading rooms full of nervous, dangerous people would have caught it. Elena caught it. "I don't remember clearly," Lily said, her voice trembling beautifully, like something rehearsed 100 times until it sounded spontaneous. "I was walking past the study, and I heard a voice, and then I felt someone behind me, and I got so scared I ran, and Damien found me like this." It was a story with no shape, no names, no details that could be checked or disproven. Elena had negotiated enough conflicts between quarreling wolves to recognize the architecture of a lie built to survive scrutiny by refusing to give scrutiny anything to hold on to. But when she looked around at the pack members gathered on the lawn, she saw only sympathy directed at the crying woman and wary distance directed at her. "We'll investigate," Damien said, already turning back toward the house, his hand hovering near Lily's back in a way that made something twist painfully behind Elena's ribs. "Everyone should go back to their mourning. There's nothing more to see here." The crowd dispersed slowly, reluctantly, the way crowds do when they sense a story is not yet finished. Elena stood on the porch a moment longer, watching her husband guide his cousin back inside the house with a gentleness she had not felt from him in months. And she thought, not for the first time in recent weeks, that something in her marriage had begun to rot from the inside, quietly, invisibly, the way wood rots beneath a coat of fresh paint. She followed them inside. In the kitchen, she found Grace, one of the oldest wolves in the pack, and the closest thing Elena had to a true friend within these walls, standing at the counter, with 2 cups of tea already poured, one clearly meant for Elena. "You look like you haven't slept," Grace said, sliding the cup across the counter. "I haven't," Elena admitted, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic. "Grace, tell me honestly, have you noticed anything strange about Lily?" Grace was quiet for a moment, stirring her tea, though there was nothing left to stir. "I've noticed she's very good at being seen," she said finally. "Every time Damien walks into a room, she finds a way to be standing where the light catches her face. Every time something goes wrong, she's the one who needs comforting, never the one who needs to explain herself. You've seen it too," Elena said, relief and dread mixing together in her chest. "I've seen it. But Elena, you have to be careful how you say it out loud. A woman who questions another woman's tears too closely gets called cruel, even when she's right, especially when she's right." Elena thought about that as she climbed the stairs later that morning, past the study where the incident had supposedly occurred. The door was slightly open. Inside, she could see Damien sitting behind his desk, and Lily perched on the edge of it, far closer than professional distance required, her hand resting lightly on his forearm, as she spoke in a low voice Elena could not quite make out. Damien was nodding, his expression soft in a way it had not been soft toward Elena in weeks. Elena did not go in. She stood in the hallway, feeling something she recognized, but had not felt in a very long time, not since she was a young wolf still learning her place in a dangerous world. It was the feeling of being unwelcome in her own home. That evening, at the long table where the pack's senior members gathered for dinner, Lily arrived late, her hair carefully arranged to look effortless, wearing a dress that was modest by any reasonable standard, but somehow drew every eye in the room the moment she walked in. She apologized softly for her lateness, mentioned that she still felt shaken from the morning, and slid into the seat directly across from Damien, though there had been an empty chair beside Grace that would have made more sense. "How are you feeling?" Damien asked her, his voice carrying a warmth that made the muscles in Elena's shoulders tighten. "Better," Lily said, offering a small, brave smile, the kind of smile that seemed designed to be admired for its courage. "I don't want to make a fuss. I know I'm still new here, and I don't want anyone to think I'm trying to cause trouble." "You're not causing trouble," Damien said quickly, too quickly, before anyone else at the table could form an opinion of their own. "Your safety matters. This is your home too now." Elena watched the words land, watched how they settled over the table like a soft blanket that excluded her entirely. She had grown up with the belief, instilled by her own mother, that Aluna's power was not loud. It did not announce itself with raised voices or dramatic gestures. It lived in steadiness, in the quiet certainty that people could lean on her without being crushed. But steadiness, she was beginning to understand, could be mistaken for coldness by anyone determined to see it that way. "I'm glad you're feeling safer," Elena said evenly, reaching for the bread basket, as though nothing about the moment troubled her. "Perhaps tomorrow we can walk through exactly what happened last night, step by step, so we can figure out who was in the house and rule out any real danger." It was a reasonable thing to say. It was, in fact, exactly what a responsible Luna should say, but Lily's lower lip trembled immediately, and her eyes welled up again, and she set down her fork with a small, defeated motion. "I don't think I can go through it again right now," she said softly. "I'm sorry. I know that's not helpful." "Elena," Damien said, and there it was again, that note of warning in his voice, she was hearing more and more often lately. "Maybe this isn't the time." Elena looked at her husband across the table, at the man she had bonded with under a summer moon 6 years ago, who had once told her that her strength was the thing he trusted most in the world, and she felt the first true crack open somewhere deep inside her chest. She said nothing more. She finished her dinner in silence, while around her the conversation drifted gently back toward safer topics, and Lily's tears dried as quickly as they had come, leaving behind nothing but a faint pink flush on her cheeks, that somehow made her look even more sympathetic to everyone at that table except one. Later that night, lying awake again while Damien slept beside her for the first time in days, Elena stared at the ceiling and thought about the promise she had made on their bonding day. She had sworn to stand beside him no matter what storms came, to trust him even when trust was difficult, to be the steady ground beneath his feet when the weight of leadership grew too heavy for one person to carry alone. She had meant every word of it. She still wanted to mean it. But lying there in the darkness, listening to the quiet, even breathing of a man who had not once, not a single time that day, asked her how she was holding up under the weight of a stranger's tears, she felt for the first time a small, cold seed of doubt take root, one she would spend the coming weeks trying and failing to pull out before it grew into something she could no longer ignore. Outside, the wind moved through the trees that bordered the Blackthorn territory, and somewhere far off, a lone wolf howled, a sound that on any other night would have felt like home. Tonight it only made Elena feel more alone than she had felt in 6 years of marriage, lying beside a man who was already, in ways she could not yet name, slipping away from her. 3 weeks passed, and the incident in the hallway was never fully explained, though it left behind a residue that coded everything Elena did. Pack members who had once greeted her warmly now offered polite but careful smiles, the kind reserved for someone whose character had become, however unfairly, a subject of quiet debate. Elena noticed it in small ways first. A conversation that stopped a half-second too late when she entered a room. An invitation to a gathering that arrived a day after everyone else's. The way Grace's daughter, who used to run up and hug Elena's legs every morning, now hung back near her mother, watching Elena with the wary curiosity of a child who has absorbed an adult's unspoken suspicion without understanding its source. Lily, meanwhile, had settled into pack life with the ease of someone who had been born to it. She had been introduced as a distant cousin of Damien's, arriving from a smaller pack up north after some vague hardship that no one seemed able to describe in detail. Officially, she had come to help manage the pack's finances, a task she performed competently enough during the day. Unofficially, she had become something closer to a fixture at Damien's side, present at meetings she had no real reason to attend, offering opinions on pack matters with a confidence that seemed to grow a little more each week. Elena tried, at first, to be generous. She remembered what it felt like to be new somewhere, unsure of her footing, dependent on the kindness of strangers to find her place. She invited Lily to walk with her through the territory, pointed out the boundaries, the safe paths, the places where the river ran too fast to cross safely after heavy rain. Lily had smiled and thanked her sweetly, and for a few days Elena had allowed herself to believe that perhaps she had misjudged the woman, that grief and displacement could make anyone seem strange and unreadable. Then came the training session. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and the younger pack members had gathered in the clearing behind the main house for combat drills, a tradition Elena had led personally since she became Luna. She believed every wolf, regardless of rank, should know how to protect themselves and their pack, and she took particular pride in teaching the younger women, many of whom had grown up believing strength was something reserved for men. Lily had asked, with apparent shyness, if she could watch. "Of course," Elena had said. "You're welcome to join in, if you'd like." Lily had declined, saying she preferred to observe, and had settled onto a bench near the edge of the clearing, where Damien happened to be standing, having come to check on the training as he sometimes did. Elena thought nothing of it. She moved through the exercises, correcting stances, offering encouragement, occasionally sparring with one of the more advanced students to demonstrate technique. It was during one of these demonstrations, a simple defensive maneuver against a young man twice her size, that she heard Lily gasp, sharp and startled, from the edge of the clearing. Elena turned, mid-motion, to see Lily with a hand pressed to her chest, her face pale. "I'm sorry," Lily said quickly, when she saw everyone looking at her. I didn't expect it to look so violent. It frightened me. I'm sorry. Please continue." The training resumed, but something had shifted in the air, a self-consciousness that had not been there before. Elena noticed several of the younger wolves glancing toward Lily now, instead of watching their own footwork, as though her fear had become a kind of commentary on the entire exercise. When the session ended, Damien walked over, not to Elena, but to Lily. crouching slightly to speak with her in a low, soothing voice. "It's just training," Elena said, approaching them both, trying to keep her tone light. "Everyone here has done this 100 times. It's how we keep each other safe." "I know," Lily said, still looking shaken. "I know it's necessary. I just haven't seen anything like that since." She stopped herself, pressing her lips together, letting the sentence trail off into a silence that practically begged to be filled with sympathy and speculation. "Since what?" Elena asked, genuinely curious now, though she already suspected the vagueness was deliberate. "It's nothing," Lily said, standing up and offering a small, brave smile. "Old memories. I don't like to talk about them." "Thank you for understanding, Damien." She had not thanked Elena at all. That evening, Damien found Elena in their bedroom, and for the first time in weeks, he seemed to actually want to talk to her, though not in the way she had hoped. "I think you should be a little more careful during training, when Lily is around," he said, not quite meeting her eyes as he loosened his collar. "She's been through a lot. I don't know the details, but her old pack wasn't kind to her. Seeing sparring like that, it probably brings up bad memories." "Damien, that's how we train. It's how I trained. It's how you trained. If she's uncomfortable, she doesn't have to watch. I'm not saying stop training. I'm saying maybe show a little more sensitivity. Is that so much to ask?" Elena studied him for a long moment, searching his face for some trace of the man who used to ask about her day before asking about anyone else's, who used to notice when she was tired before she had to say so. "Have you asked me how I'm doing lately?" she said quietly. "Have you asked how it feels, being watched and judged for teaching self-defense in my own territory?" Damien sighed, the particular sigh of a man who believes he is being reasonable and is frustrated that no one else seems to see it. "I'm just asking you to be kind, Elena. That's all." "I am kind," Elena said, and her voice cracked slightly on the words, betraying more hurt than she intended to show. "I have been nothing but kind to a woman I barely know, who has been in this pack for a month, and somehow already occupies more of your attention than I do." The words hung in the room, sharper than she meant them to sound, and she watched Damien's jaw tighten in the way it did when he felt cornered. "That's not fair," he said. "She has no one else here. I'm just trying to make her feel welcome, the way any decent alpha would for a family member in need." "And what about me?" Elena asked. "Am I not in need of anything? Am I only useful when I'm being steady and asking nothing of you?" Damien did not answer. He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes, and then he turned and left the room without another word, leaving Elena standing alone in the middle of the space they were supposed to share, feeling more like a stranger in her own life than she had ever felt before. She did not cry. She had promised herself long ago that crying solved nothing, that a Luna who wept in private still had to rise the next morning and lead, regardless of how her heart had been treated the night before. Instead, she sat by the window and watched the moon rise over the trees, thinking about the young woman she had been on her bonding day, who had believed, with her whole heart, that love and loyalty were enough to weather any storm. She still believed it, mostly, but she was beginning to understand that a storm could not be weathered by one person alone, and that a promise, no matter how sincerely made, could not hold a marriage together if only one person kept it. Downstairs, she could hear faint voices in the study, Damien's low murmur, and, beneath it, softer and more careful, the voice of the woman who had somehow become the emotional center of gravity in a home that used to belong, without question, to Elena alone. She did not go down to listen. She already knew, in the quiet, aching part of herself that had started keeping score without her permission, that whatever was being said down there was not being said to her, and that this fact alone told her more about her marriage than any words could have. The following morning, she woke before dawn again, dressed quietly, and walked the boundaries of the territory alone, the way she used to before she became Luna, when the land had been the only thing she trusted completely. The frost on the grass caught the first light of morning, and for a moment, standing at the edge of the forest with her breath fogging in the cold air, Elena allowed herself to imagine, just briefly, what her life might look like if she stopped waiting for her husband to remember why he had chosen her in the first place. It was a dangerous thought, one she pushed away quickly, telling herself that 6 years of marriage deserved more patience than 3 weeks of strange behavior from a newcomer. But the thought did not disappear entirely. It settled somewhere quiet inside her, small and patient, waiting for the moment it would be needed. The weeks that followed blurred together into a pattern. Elena grew to recognize the way one learns to recognize the specific quality of light before a storm. It always began the same way. Lily would appear somewhere Damien happened to be, offer some small, delicate observation or request, and within minutes, some minor conflict would arise, something so small it would have dissolved into nothing in any other circumstance, except that Lily's eyes would fill with tears at precisely the moment it would do the most damage. It happened at a pack council meeting, when Elena corrected a scheduling error Lily had made in the quarterly resource report, a simple mistake that any new member might make, pointed out gently and without malice. Lily's chin had trembled, her eyes had glistened, and she had murmured an apology so soft and so wounded that 3 senior wolves had immediately turned to comfort her, while Elena stood at the head of the table feeling, absurdly, like the villain in a story she had not agreed to be part of. It happened again at a family dinner, when Elena asked Lily a simple question about her plans for the coming season, intending only polite conversation, and Lily had gone quiet, her eyes dropping to her plate, until finally, she whispered that she did not like to think too far ahead, not since she had lost everything in her old pack, and the table had fallen into a hush of sympathy that made Elena's innocent question feel, in retrospect, like an act of cruelty. Elena began to dread gatherings. She began to measure her words before speaking them, running each sentence through a private filter, searching for any phrase that might be twisted into evidence of coldness. It exhausted her in a way physical battle never had. She had faced rogue wolves in combat without her heart rate rising the way it did now, walking into a room where Lily might be present, wondering what small, ordinary moment might become. By evening, another story of Elena's unkindness whispered among the pack. Grace noticed the toll it was taking. She found Elena one afternoon in the garden behind the house, kneeling among the herbs Elena had planted years ago, though her hands had stopped actually tending them, resting idle in the soil. "You've gone quiet," Grace said, settling onto the bench nearby. The old Elena would have called this out weeks ago, loudly, in front of everyone. The old Elena didn't know that calling things out would make her the villain, Elena said, without looking up. "Every time I say anything true, it becomes proof of something cruel in me. I don't know how to fight something that turns my own honesty into a weapon against me." "You could stop being honest," Grace said carefully, watching Elena's reaction. "You could let it go, keep the peace, wait for it to burn out on its own." "Would you do that?" Elena asked, finally meeting her friend's eyes. Grace was quiet for a long moment. "No," she admitted, "but I'm not the one whose marriage is on the scale." That evening, Damien called Elena into his study, and something in his tone when he asked her to come told her this would not be a conversation she wanted to have. She entered to find him standing by the window, his back to her, his shoulders carrying a tension she recognized from the days before difficult pack decisions. "Lily came to me today," he said, without turning around. "She's upset. She says you've been avoiding her, that you've made it clear she's not welcome here." "That's not true," Elena said, keeping her voice steady, though something inside her had begun to ache with a familiar, exhausting weariness. "I've been polite to her every single time we've spoken. I haven't avoided her. I've simply stopped seeking her out, because every conversation seems to end with her in tears, and me somehow at fault. She says you correct her in front of others, that you make her feel small. I corrected one report, Damien. Once. Because it was wrong, and because as Luna, it is literally my responsibility to ensure our records are accurate. That is not cruelty. That is my job." Damien finally turned to face her, and there was something in his expression that frightened her more than anger would have, a kind of weary disappointment, as though he had already decided something, and was only now getting around to informing her of it. "I need you to be gentler with her," he said. "She's fragile, Elena. She's lost people. She doesn't have the thick skin you have. Not everyone can just brush things off the way you do." "And what about me?" Elena asked, her voice rising despite her best efforts to keep it level. "Do I not deserve gentleness?" Do I not deserve to be believed when I tell you the truth about what's happening in my own home? This isn't about you, Damien said, and something in the careless certainty of that sentence landed like a physical blow. This is about making sure a vulnerable member of this pack feels safe. I am a member of this pack too, Elena said quietly. I am your Luna. I have led beside you for 6 years. Do you not see how strange this is, that a woman who arrived 6 weeks ago has become the emotional center of every conversation we have, while I am asked, again and again, to shrink myself smaller to accommodate her tears? Damien was silent for a long moment, and in that silence, Elena felt something in her chest crack fully open, a fissure that had been forming for weeks finally giving way. She waited for him to say something, anything, that might close it back up. He did not. I'm not saying you're wrong to feel frustrated, he said finally, his voice careful in a way that told her he had rehearsed this. But I need you to try harder, for the sake of the pack, for the sake of us. Elena looked at her husband, really looked at him, searching for the man who had once stood beside her at their bonding ceremony, and promised, in front of the entire pack, that he would trust her judgment above all others, that her voice would always carry weight in his decisions. She could not find that man in the tired, defensive stranger standing before her now. I have tried, she said softly. I have tried harder than you know, but I cannot keep apologizing for things I did not do, to smooth over feelings that seem to appear and disappear with perfect convenience whenever it benefits her. That's a cruel thing to say, Damien said, his voice sharpening. Is it crueler than what's being said about me? Elena asked. Is it crueler than the whispers I hear when I walk into a room, the looks I get from wolves who used to trust me completely? I am not the one who has changed, Damien. Something else has changed, and I don't think you want to see it. He did not answer. He simply looked away, toward the window, toward the darkness settling over the territory they were both sworn to protect, and in his silence, Elena heard something clearer than any words could have told her. She turned and left the study without another word, walking down the hallway past the kitchen where, she noticed with a small, bitter ache, Lily was sitting at the table, sipping tea, watching her pass with an expression that, for just a moment, before it rearranged itself into practiced sympathy, looked almost like satisfaction. Elena did not sleep that night either. She lay awake long after Damien finally came to bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every strange small moment of the past weeks, searching for the thread that connected them all. She thought about the crying in the hallway that first morning, the gasp during training, the trembling apology over the report, the whispered story at dinner about losing everything. Each incident alone could be explained away as coincidence, as genuine fragility, as the understandable reaction of a woman who had suffered real hardship. But together, laid end to end, they formed a pattern too precise, too perfectly timed, too consistently advantageous to be accidental. Elena had spent 6 years learning to read the currents beneath pack politics, the subtle maneuvers of wolves seeking status, or protection, or favor. She recognized, now, lying awake in the dark beside a husband who had begun to feel like a stranger, that she was looking at exactly that kind of maneuver, executed with a skill that suggested Lily Bennett had done this before, somewhere, to someone else, long before she ever arrived at the gates of the Blackthorn pack. The question that kept Elena awake until the first gray light of dawn was not whether her suspicion was correct, it was what she was going to do about it, and whether the man sleeping beside her would believe her when she finally found the proof. The proof came from an unexpected place, though Elena would later think it should not have surprised her at all, because pack territories, for all their size, were small worlds where secrets traveled fast among those willing to listen. It began with a visitor. A young wolf named Nathan arrived at the Blackthorn border one gray afternoon, requesting temporary shelter while passing through on his way to visit distant relatives. Border protocol required Elena to personally interview any traveler seeking hospitality, a task she performed with the same careful attention she gave everything else, though her mind these days rarely strayed far from the tangled knot of tension inside her own home. Nathan was polite, a little nervous, clearly exhausted from days of travel. Elena offered him tea and a place by the fire while his papers were verified, and it was during this quiet exchange, making small conversation to put him at ease, that she mentioned, almost in passing, the name of the pack's newest member. Lily Bennett, she said. She joined us a couple of months ago, from a smaller pack up north. Do you know of it? I've never quite gotten a clear picture of where exactly she came from. Nathan's expression shifted, something careful and hesitant crossing his face. Lily Bennett, he repeated slowly. I think I might have heard that name before. From the Ravensworth pack, maybe 2 years back, there was some trouble there, before I left. A woman by that name, or one very close to it. Elena's pulse quickened, though she kept her voice carefully neutral. What kind of trouble? Nathan hesitated, glancing toward the door as though worried about being overheard, even though they were alone. I don't like to spread stories, he said, but there was an alpha there, married, respected. His Luna was well liked. And then this woman arrived, a relative of some kind, and within a year, the Luna had been driven out, disgraced in front of the whole pack over accusations that were never fully proven. The marriage ended. The woman married the alpha herself not long after. Elena felt the floor tilt slightly beneath her, though she remained perfectly still. Are you certain it was the same woman? I can't be certain, Nathan admitted. It's been years, and I only heard the story secondhand, from someone who left Ravensworth around the same time I did. But the name struck me the moment you said it. It's not a common one. Elena thanked him, gave him leave to rest in the guest quarters, and walked out into the cold afternoon air with her mind racing faster than she could control. A coincidence, perhaps. Names repeated across packs more often than people like to admit, but combined with everything else, the pattern she had already begun to see, it felt less like coincidence, and more like confirmation of something she had feared, but not yet let herself fully believe. She spent the following days investigating quietly, carefully, aware that any misstep could be used against her, if word reached Damien too soon, framed as some kind of obsessive vendetta rather than the careful inquiry it actually was. She sent a discreet message to an old friend, a Luna from a neighboring territory who maintained good relations with packs across the region, asking if she had ever heard of trouble at Ravensworth involving a woman named Lily Bennett. The reply came back within a week, and it confirmed everything Nathan had told her, and more. The friend had heard the story from multiple sources over the years, told slightly differently each time, but always with the same core details. A Luna named Vivian, respected and beloved, accused of cruelty toward a fragile newcomer who wept prettily at council meetings and confided in the alpha late into the night. A pack slowly turning against its own leader, a public reprimand, a resignation forced through humiliation rather than honest wrongdoing, and finally, a marriage that ended not because the Luna had done anything wrong, but because she had been made to look, in the eyes of everyone around her, as though she had. Elena read the message twice, sitting alone in the small study she used for pack correspondence, her hands trembling slightly, as the full shape of what she was facing became clear. This was not the confused, frightened behavior of a woman who had suffered genuine trauma and did not know how to process it around new people. This was a pattern, refined over time, executed with the precision of someone who understood exactly how sympathy could be weaponized against a woman whose only crime was leading with steadiness instead of visible vulnerability. She thought about bringing the information straight to Damien, laying it all out before him, the way she would present evidence in any pack dispute. But she made herself wait, made herself think it through carefully, because she understood that Damien's trust in Lily had grown deep enough, now that raw accusation alone might not be enough to break it. She needed something undeniable. She needed him to hear it from a source he could not dismiss as jealousy or paranoia. She reached out further, gathering the names of 2 others who had witnessed the events at Ravensworth, directly rather than secondhand, wolves, who had since relocated to different territories, but who agreed, reluctantly, to speak with her when she explained what was happening in her own home. Their accounts matched almost exactly, detail for detail, and by the time Elena had finished compiling everything she had learned, she possessed a case so thorough that she felt, for the first time in weeks, something like solid ground beneath her feet again. She chose her moment carefully. She waited until an evening, when Lily had retired early with a headache, conveniently, Elena thought, though she pushed the uncharitable thought aside and focused on what mattered. She found Damien alone in his study, the way she had found him so many times in recent weeks, and this time she did not wait for him to summon her. She walked in, closed the door behind her, and sat down across from him with the folder of gathered testimony in her hands. "I need you to listen to me," she said, without interrupting, "until I'm finished. Can you do that?" Something in her tone must have carried more weight than her usual attempts at calm reasoning, because Damien nodded slowly, setting aside the papers he had been reviewing. Elena laid it all out for him, methodically, the way she had learned to present evidence during pact disputes, starting with Nathan's account and moving through each corroborating testimony she had gathered. She watched Damien's face as she spoke, watched the careful neutrality he tried to maintain slowly give way to something more troubled beneath the surface. When she finished, she set the folder on the desk between them and waited. For a long moment, Damien said nothing. He stared at the folder without touching it, his jaw working slightly, and Elena allowed herself a small, cautious flicker of hope that perhaps, finally, he was truly seeing what she had been trying to show him for weeks. Then he looked up at her, and the expression on his face was not the one she had hoped for. "You went behind my back," he said quietly, "gathering rumors about my cousin from strangers, to build a case against her." "I gathered evidence," Elena said, her voice tightening, "because you refused to listen to anything I said without it. Because every time I raised a concern, you told me I was being unkind, or jealous, or unfair. I did what you left me no other choice but to do." "These are second-hand stories from people who left their pack under unclear circumstances themselves," Damien said, pushing the folder back across the desk toward her, not even opening it fully. "You're asking me to believe that my cousin, who has done nothing here but try to build a life after losing everything, is secretly some kind of predator who's done this before. Do you hear how that sounds?" "I hear exactly how it sounds," Elena said, standing now, her hands trembling with a mixture of anger and heartbreak she could no longer fully control. "It sounds like the truth, Damien. It sounds like a pattern too precise to be coincidence, but I understand that it's easier for you to believe I've lost my mind than to believe the woman you've been comforting every night for 2 months might not be who she claims to be." "That's not fair," Damien said, rising as well, his voice hardening. "None of this has been fair," Elena said. "Not to me. I have watched you take her word over mine, again and again, without a single moment of hesitation, while I have led this pack faithfully for 6 years, and never once given you reason to doubt me. And now I bring you actual evidence, gathered from people with nothing to gain by lying, and you still choose her." Damien's face was pale now, his hands clenched at his sides. "I'm not choosing anyone," he said. "I'm trying to be fair to a member of my family who is struggling." "You are choosing," Elena said quietly, all the fight suddenly draining out of her voice, replaced by something colder and more final. "You are choosing every single day, in 100 small ways, and you don't even see it, because it feels to you like kindness. But it doesn't feel like kindness from where I'm standing, Damien. It feels like abandonment." She picked up the folder from the desk, holding it against her chest like something precious that had just been rejected, and walked toward the door. Before she left, she turned back one last time. "I hope I'm wrong," she said. "I hope, more than anything, that everything I've found is coincidence, and that she is exactly who she says she is. But if I'm right, Damien, I need you to understand that I will not stay silent forever, no matter how many times you ask me to." She left him standing alone in his study, the folder of evidence still in her hands, and walked out into the cold night air, feeling, for the first time in a long while, less like a woman fighting to save her marriage, and more like a woman beginning, slowly and painfully, to accept that it might already be lost. The public reprimand, when it finally came, happened on a Sunday, during the monthly gathering the entire Blackthorn pack attended without exception, a tradition meant to reinforce unity and give every member a chance to voice concerns before the collected community. Elena had presided over dozens of these gatherings during her years as Luna, and she knew, walking into the great hall that afternoon, that something about this one felt different, before a single word had been spoken. Lily was already seated near the front, close to where Damien would stand to address the pack, wearing an expression of fragile composure that Elena had come to recognize as a kind of performance, though she was now the only person in the room who seemed to see it that way. The other pack members filed in slowly, filling the benches, murmuring among themselves in a tone that carried an undercurrent Elena did not like, a kind of anticipatory tension that suggested word had already spread about something before it had officially been announced. Damien rose to address the pack, and Elena, seated in her customary place at his side, felt a growing unease as she watched him avoid her eyes, his attention fixed instead on some point at the back of the hall. "I've called this gathering," he began, "to address a matter that has caused tension within our pack in recent weeks. It concerns the way we treat vulnerable members of our community, and the responsibility each of us carries to make this pack a place of safety, not fear." Elena's stomach dropped. She understood, in that moment, with a clarity that felt almost physical, exactly where this speech was heading, and there was nothing she could do to stop it from unfolding in front of everyone she had spent 6 years leading. "Lily has shared with me," Damien continued, "that she has felt unwelcome and, at times, unsafe within this pack, particularly in her interactions with certain leadership figures." He did not say Elena's name, but he did not need to. Every head in the room turned, slowly and almost involuntarily, toward where Elena sat. "I believe," Damien went on, his voice carrying the practiced authority of an alpha addressing his people, "that we owe every member of this pack, especially those who have suffered hardship before joining us, an environment of warmth and acceptance. I am asking, publicly, that we all reflect on how we treat one another, and that certain individuals in positions of leadership consider whether their conduct has fallen short of the standard this pack deserves." The silence that followed was the loudest sound Elena had ever heard. She felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her, some sympathetic, most simply uncertain, waiting to see how she would respond to what amounted to a public accusation, delivered without her name ever being spoken, precisely so that Damien could claim, later, that he had never directly condemned her at all. She could have stayed silent. She could have absorbed the humiliation quietly, the way she had absorbed so much in recent weeks, waiting for a better moment to defend herself. But something in her, some final thread of the woman she had always been before doubt and exhaustion had worn her down, refused to let this moment pass unanswered. She rose to her feet, slowly, deliberately, and turned to face the gathered pack. "I would like to know," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling she felt in her hands, "exactly what conduct is being referred to, so that I might respond to it directly, rather than to a shadow cast without a name attached." Murmurs rippled through the hall. Damien's jaw tightened, and for a moment he looked as though he had not expected her to speak at all, as though he had planned this moment to end with quiet acceptance rather than open confrontation. "This isn't the place for a debate, Elena," he said. "With respect," Elena replied, "I believe a public accusation, however carefully worded to avoid naming me directly, deserves a public response. I have led this pack at your side for 6 years. I have earned the right to defend myself when my character is questioned, in front of the very people I have sworn to protect." She turned then, not to Damien, but to the pack itself, meeting the eyes of wolves she had trained, healed, comforted, and fought beside for years. "I corrected an error in a report, once," she said. "I asked reasonable questions about an incident in our home that was never fully explained. I taught self-defense to our young people, the way I have every year since becoming Luna, and someone found it frightening to watch. These are the things I am apparently guilty of. I ask each of you, honestly, whether any of these actions deserve the shame I have felt walking through my own home these past months." Lily, seated near the front, had begun to cry again, softly, her shoulders trembling, and Elena watched several pack members turn toward her instinctively, their attention pulled away from Elena's words by the immediate, visible distress in front of them. It was, Elena realized with a bitter clarity, the same pattern she had watched play out again and again, except now it was happening in front of the entire pack, with Damien himself as the instrument delivering the final blow. "I am not the villain in this story," Elena said, her voice finally beginning to shake, though not with weakness. "But I am beginning to understand that it does not matter how true that is, if the people around me have already decided who deserves their sympathy and who does not." She did not wait for Damien's response. She walked out of the great hall, past rows of pack members who did not know whether to meet her eyes or look away, out into the cold afternoon air, where she stood alone for a long moment, breathing hard, feeling something inside her that had been bending under pressure for months, finally, quietly, begin to break. In the days after the gathering, Elena moved through the pack house like a ghost in her own home. Conversations stopped when she entered rooms. Invitations to small gatherings dried up entirely. Even Grace, though she remained loyal, seemed to carry a new caution in her manner, as though associating too closely with Elena now carried a risk neither of them wanted to name out loud. Damien did not apologize for the gathering. In the days that followed, he treated the matter as though it had already been resolved, as though his carefully worded speech had accomplished exactly what he intended, restoring peace to the pack, while allowing him to avoid ever directly confronting the question of who was actually telling the truth. He spoke to Elena about pack business when necessary, brief and formal exchanges about resources and territory disputes, but the warmth that had once defined their marriage, already thin before the gathering, had disappeared entirely now, replaced by a careful, exhausting politeness that felt, to Elena, worse than open conflict would have. It was during this period that the demand came, delivered not in private, but through Grace, who arrived at Elena's door one evening, looking deeply uncomfortable, clearly unhappy about the role she had been asked to play. "Damien asked me to speak with you," Grace said, not meeting Elena's eyes at first. "He thinks it would help ease tension in the pack if you offered Lily an apology, publicly, if possible. He says it would go a long way toward restoring peace." Elena stared at her friend for a long moment, waiting for the punchline, for some indication that this was a misunderstanding, rather than an actual request. When none came, something inside her went very still and very quiet. "He wants me to apologize," she said slowly, "to the woman who has spent months undermining me in my own home, who has a documented history of doing this exact thing to another Luna, in another pack, whose tears have cost me the trust of people I have led faithfully for 6 years. He wants me to apologize to her." "I know how it sounds," Grace said quietly. "I told him I didn't think it was fair. But he's not really asking, Elena. He's telling you what he needs to happen for things to go back to normal." Elena sat down slowly on the edge of her bed, feeling something settle over her that was not quite anger, and not quite grief, but some third thing made from both, cold and clear and final. She thought about every promise she had made on her bonding day, every year she had spent building trust with a pack that now looked at her with suspicion, every moment of patience she had extended toward a husband who had chosen, again and again, to believe a stranger's tears over his wife's steady honesty. She thought about what it would mean to apologize now, to bow her head in front of the pack, and offer contrition for crimes she had not committed, simply to smooth things over, to restore a peace that had never actually been threatened by anything she had done. She understood, with sudden and total clarity, that if she did this, if she bent this far to accommodate a lie, there would be no bottom to how far she would be expected to bend in the future. Today it was an apology. Tomorrow it might be her title. Eventually, she suspected, it would be everything she had spent her life building. "Tell him," Elena said finally, her voice steady in a way that surprised even her, "that I will not apologize for the truth. Tell him that if he needs peace badly enough to ask his wife to lie in front of the entire pack, then the peace he's protecting was never real to begin with." Grace nodded slowly, something like relief and sorrow mixing together in her expression. "I thought you might say that," she said. "For what it's worth, I believe you, Elena. I always have." "Thank you," Elena said softly. "That matters more than you know." After Grace left, Elena sat alone in the quiet of her room for a long time, watching the last light of evening fade from the sky outside her window. She understood now, with a clarity that felt almost peaceful after weeks of confusion and doubt, that something fundamental had shifted between her and Damien, something that could not be repaired by patience or time alone. He had asked her to make herself smaller, to apologize for standing firm in her own truth, simply because it was more convenient than confronting the possibility that he had been wrong. And in asking that of her, he had shown her, more clearly than any single betrayal could have, that the promise she had made on her bonding day, to stand beside him no matter what storms came, had never been matched by an equal promise from him to protect her when the storm arrived. She thought about her mother, long gone now, who had once told her that a Luna's greatest strength was knowing the difference between bending and breaking, and understanding that sometimes walking away was not weakness, but the truest form of strength a person could show. Elena had not fully understood those words when she was young. She understood them now, sitting alone in a room that had once felt like home, in a marriage that had once felt unbreakable, watching the last light disappear from the sky, and feeling, for the first time in months, something like clarity settle over the chaos that had defined her recent life. She would not apologize, she would not shrink herself smaller, and she would not, she realized with a quiet, growing certainty, continue pretending that a promise made 6 years ago obligated her to remain in a place where her honesty had become a liability, and her steadiness had been mistaken for cruelty. The realization did not arrive with anger or drama. It arrived quietly, the way true decisions often do, settling into her chest like something solid and unshakable. And for the first time in weeks, Elena Hartley slept through the night without waking. The following morning, Elena rose before dawn, as she had so many times in recent weeks, but this time there was no restlessness in her movements, no anxious replaying of the previous day's conflicts. She dressed carefully, methodically, and walked through the pack house with a calm that felt, to her own surprise, almost peaceful. She found Vincent, the pack's beta, and one of the few members whose loyalty she had never once doubted, in his usual place near the eastern gate, reviewing the morning patrol schedules. He looked up as she approached, and something in her expression must have told him this was not a casual visit. "I need you to call a full pack council," Elena said. "This evening, if possible. Everyone, not just the senior members." Vincent studied her for a long moment. "Does Damien know about this?" "Not yet," Elena said. "But he will." Vincent nodded slowly, and though he did not ask further questions, Elena could see in his eyes that he understood, at least in part, what was coming. He had been beta long enough to recognize the particular stillness of a leader who had finally made peace with a difficult decision. Word spread through the pack quickly that day, the way important news always did, and by the time evening arrived, the great hall was fuller than it had been even during the previous gathering, every member of the Blackthorn pack present, drawn by curiosity, and, Elena suspected, by an instinct that something significant was about to happen. Damien arrived last, visibly uncertain about what this meeting was for, having received only Vincent's brief notice that Elena had called the council herself. He took his usual place, but Elena remained standing at the front of the hall instead of returning to her seat beside him, and the pack fell into an expectant hush. "I want to thank you all for coming," Elena began, her voice carrying clearly through the hall, steady in a way that surprised even her. "I know the past months have been difficult for this pack, and I know many of you have found yourselves uncertain about who to believe and what to think regarding recent events. I owe you the full truth, and I intend to give it to you tonight." She laid it all out, calmly and without embellishment, the way she had once laid evidence before Damien, in the privacy of his study, except now she spoke to the entire pack she had spent 6 years serving. She described the pattern she had observed since Lily's arrival, the strange timing of the tears, the way concerns had been consistently redirected away from scrutiny. She spoke of Nathan's account, of the confirmed testimony from Ravensworth, of the eerily familiar story of a respected Luna, driven out through carefully orchestrated sympathy, rather than any real wrongdoing. Throughout her account, she watched Lily's face grow pale, watched Damien's expression shift from confusion to something more troubled as he heard, for the first time in front of witnesses who could not be dismissed as biased, the full weight of evidence Elena had gathered weeks earlier. "I am not asking you to simply take my word for this," Elena said, when she had finished. "I have brought written testimony, gathered independently from multiple sources who have nothing to gain by lying. I encourage every one of you to examine it yourselves, and to draw your own conclusions." The hall remained silent for a long moment, and then, slowly, voices began to rise, murmurs of shock and disbelief rippling through the gathered pack, as the folder of testimony was passed hand to hand among the senior members, seated near the front. "This is absurd," Lily said, her voice thin and trembling, though Elena noticed, this time, that fewer heads turned toward her with automatic sympathy. "You're twisting old rumors into some kind of conspiracy, because you're threatened by me." "I have no need to twist anything," Elena said calmly. The dates and names in that testimony can be verified by anyone willing to travel to Ravensworth and ask. I did not fabricate a single word of it. Damien rose slowly from his seat, and for a long moment, Elena thought he might finally, publicly, take her side, might finally see clearly what she had been trying to show him for months. But when he spoke, his words carried the same careful neutrality she had come to expect, the tone of a leader trying desperately to avoid choosing a side, even when a side had already been chosen for him by the truth itself. We should discuss this privately, he said. Not in front of the entire pack. No, Elena said, and the word rang through the hall with unmistakable finality. We should not discuss this privately, Damien, because privately is exactly where you have refused to hear me for months. I brought this evidence to you weeks ago, in private, and you dismissed it. I am done asking you privately to see what has been happening in our own home. She turned then to face the gathered pack, meeting eyes she had known for years, wolves whose children she had helped deliver, whose disputes she had settled, whose safety she had guarded through every season since becoming their Luna. I have led this pack faithfully for 6 years, she said. I have never once asked for gratitude, only for trust, the same trust I extended to every one of you in return. In recent months, that trust has been eroded, not because of anything I have done, but because I was condemned, publicly, by my own mate, based on the tears of a woman whose history I have now shown you in full. I stood in this very hall weeks ago and asked for my name to be cleared. Instead, I was asked to apologize for a crime I did not commit. She paused, letting the silence settle over the hall, feeling, for the first time in months, entirely calm. I made a promise on my bonding day to stand beside my alpha through every storm that came, she continued. I have kept that promise, even when it cost me dearly, even when it meant absorbing humiliation I did not deserve. But a promise made by one person cannot hold together a marriage abandoned by the other. Tonight, I release myself from that promise. I am stepping down as Luna of the Blackthorn Pack, not because I have done anything wrong, but because I refuse to remain bonded to leadership that chose convenience over truth and comfort over loyalty. The hall erupted into stunned murmurs, several voices calling out in protest, urging her to reconsider. But Elena did not waver. She looked once more at Damien, whose face had gone pale, whose mouth opened as though to speak, but found no words equal to the moment. I wish this pack every strength in the years ahead, Elena said, her voice finally softening, though it did not break. You have been my family for 6 years, and I do not regret a single day I spent protecting you. I hope, in time, you will see clearly what I have shown you tonight. But I cannot wait any longer for that clarity to arrive. She stepped down from the front of the hall, and though several pack members rose as if to stop her, something in her bearing, calm and resolute, made even the boldest among them hesitate. She walked the length of the great hall alone, past faces frozen somewhere between shock and dawning understanding, out through the heavy doors into the cool night air, where the moon hung high and full above the territory she had called home for 6 years. She did not look back. Elena left the Blackthorn territory that same night, taking only what she could carry, walking the boundary path she had patrolled 1,000 times before, until the lights of the pack house disappeared behind the trees, and the only sound left was her own steady footsteps against the frost-hardened ground. She had expected, somewhere in the private corners of her heart, that leaving would feel like defeat. Instead, with every mile that passed beneath her feet, she felt something lighter settle over her shoulders, a weight she had not fully realized she was carrying until it finally lifted. She traveled north, toward a smaller territory where an old friend, a Luna named Charlotte, whom she had met years ago during a regional council gathering, had once told her she would always have a place if she ever needed one. Charlotte welcomed her without hesitation, asking few questions, offering instead a quiet room and the simple dignity of being trusted without needing to prove herself all over again. The weeks that followed were strange in their stillness. Elena, who had spent 6 years managing the constant demands of pack leadership, found herself with time she did not know how to fill. She walked the unfamiliar forests of Charlotte's territory each morning, slowly rebuilding a sense of herself that had been worn thin by months of doubt and public scrutiny. She helped where she could, tending to minor disputes, offering guidance when asked, though she was careful never to overstep her place as a guest, rather than a leader in this new land. News from Blackthorn reached her slowly, carried by travelers passing through, fragments of a story that seemed to grow more complicated with each retelling. She learned that in the weeks after her departure, the testimony she had left behind had continued to circulate among the pack, examined more closely now that she was no longer present to be accused of bias in presenting it. She learned that Vincent, respected and trusted, had personally traveled to Ravensworth to verify the account himself, and had returned with confirmation so thorough that even the most skeptical pack members could no longer dismiss it. She learned, eventually, that Lily's careful composure had begun to crack under the weight of scrutiny she could no longer avoid, that another witness from her past had come forward, unprompted, once word spread that her history was finally being questioned openly. The pattern Elena had uncovered was not isolated to Ravensworth alone, it turned out. There had been another pack before that one, another Luna quietly pushed aside through the same careful architecture of tears and timing. Elena felt no satisfaction hearing this news, only a kind of tired sorrow for the women who had come before her, who had likely doubted themselves the way she once had, who had likely spent long nights wondering if they were the ones losing their grip on reality. She thought of them often in the quiet mornings at Charlotte's territory, hoping that wherever they had gone after their own departures, they had found the same lightness she now felt beginning to settle into her own life. Word also reached her, eventually, of Damien, that the pack's confidence in his judgment had been shaken deeply by everything that had come to light, that senior members, who had once followed him without question, now met his decisions with a new wariness, that he had reached out, more than once, through messengers who found Elena unwilling to respond, seeking some kind of reconciliation she was not yet ready to consider, and was increasingly certain she never would be. She did not hate him. She had spent enough long nights turning the entire ordeal over in her mind to understand that hatred would only keep her tethered to a place she had already chosen to leave behind. She understood that in some strange way, Damien had likely believed he was doing the right thing, protecting someone he saw as vulnerable, blind to the manipulation because he had never been trained, the way Elena had been, to recognize the particular architecture of a well-told lie. But understanding did not mean forgiveness, and it certainly did not mean a desire to return to a life where her own truth had so easily been outweighed by another woman's tears. Months passed. Elena found herself, gradually, building something new in Charlotte's territory, not as Luna, not as anything with a title at all, but simply as herself, a woman whose steadiness was valued for its own sake, rather than measured against someone else's fragility. She began teaching self-defense again, this time to young wolves who had never once questioned whether her strength was something to be feared or celebrated. She began sleeping through entire nights without waking, without the anxious replay of conversations gone wrong, without the particular dread of walking into rooms where her own honesty might be turned into evidence against her. One evening, nearly a year after she had walked away from the Blackthorn territory, Elena stood at the edge of Charlotte's land, watching the sun set behind mountains she had come to think of as beautiful in their own right, entirely separate from the home she had left behind. Charlotte joined her there, as she often did in the quiet hour before dinner, and for a while neither of them spoke. "Do you regret it?" Charlotte asked eventually. Walking away. Elena considered the question carefully, the way she had learned to consider all things during her long months of rebuilding. "No," she said finally. "I regret how long it took me to understand that a promise only means something when both people are keeping it. I don't regret leaving. I regret staying as long as I did, hoping he would finally see what everyone else eventually saw." "And if he came here tomorrow?" Charlotte asked, "asking you to come back?" Elena smiled, small and certain, and looked out at the darkening sky. "I would tell him," she said, "that I hope, sincerely, he has learned something from all of this. And I would tell him that I have built a life here that does not require his belief in me to feel whole. I made a promise once to stand beside him through every storm. I kept that promise longer than he deserved. Now I choose to stand for myself, and I have never once regretted it since." The wind moved gently through the trees, carrying with it the scent of the coming season, and Elena Hartley, once Luna of the Blackthorn pack, now simply a woman who had chosen her own worth over a broken promise, breathed it in deeply, feeling, for the first time in longer than she could remember, entirely and completely at peace with the life she had chosen to build for herself.